Market Musings podcast with Fairbairn and Russell. Hello and welcome back to the Market Musings podcast here, where today we're talking to Clarissa Sowemimo-Coker, the Chief Operating Officer at Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies. Thank you very much for joining us on the Market Musings podcast, Clarissa. How are you doing? I know we spoke on an interview not so long ago. It's good to be talking to you again.
I'm very well, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, good. Well, thank you very much. And of course, Kenny, how are you doing?
Yep, all good, all the way from Scotland, but it's very cold Scotland today. It's almost like winter. It's really bizarre how quickly the weather can change up here. Hopefully it's better weather where you are, Clarissa.
I don't want to make you too jealous, Kenny, but yeah, it's pretty lovely, kind of glorious summer day down here.
It's like 12 up here. It's just
That's not good. Where are you, Clarissa?
I'm actually about 40 minutes outside of Oxford.
Okay.
To be topical.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, good. Well, that's nice. I've got an overcast day here in Rotterdam. It's not cold, but it's it's pretty. It's just so. It's fine. But I think you've probably got the best weather out of the three of us.
I'll take that as an early win. Thanks.
Definitely. But no, it's great to have you on the podcast, Clarissa. And I was just saying to Mark before we came on air. It was about a year ago we done an interview or a podcast with Professor Mike Barnes and Hannah Deacon, who I think quite a few people remember. She was in the news quite a lot actually for bringing in medical cannabis from abroad. And we never really followed it up. And this is probably the first kind of podcast since then that we've focused again in cannabis and research and development. So we're excited to have you on, and we don't often get a lot of women coming on. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Maybe it's me, Mark. Maybe it's you. I don't know, but no, it's definitely good to have a balance because there's lots of smart women out there that should be heard. So.
Well, I mean, don't judge too soon. We haven't started talking yet, Kenny.
Yeah,
but no, I'm happy to be here. Very happy to keep the balance.
Yeah, definitely. And this podcast is all about people. Myself and Mark believe that, you could have the best projects in the world, but if you don't have the right people behind these projects, they're going nowhere. So really what it is, it's an opportunity for you, maybe for 10, 15 minutes or as long as you want, just to give us a bit about your background, so investors can, understand who the board of directors are, what your journey's been like in career, business, successes, failure. You can go back as far as you want, where you were born, what it was like growing up, what you wanted to be when you were younger. And obviously there is a legal side of your career as well, what motivated you to get into that line of work. So
sure.
Really it's like a potted history almost, and you can squeeze it into 5 minutes, you can expand it to 15, 20. And myself and Mark will just jump in with appropriate questions as and when.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. I mean, you may want to stop me. You'll discover shortly that there's an Irish side to my family, so I can talk. So do feel free to jump in and stop me. But yeah. So where did it all begin? Goodness. So you've pointed out that I am a lawyer by training, so please don't hold that against me. But it's true. I had a sort of interesting journey to the law because that's not where I started off. My background is very close-knit family, parents who ran their own business. I'm still trying to get my dad to retire. He's in his early 70s now, but it's very difficult to get somebody like him who's very entrepreneurial and self-starting to retire. So they were house builders, so designing, building and selling residential properties. And so I grew up in a kind of household where work was part and parcel of family life. I think my parents very much instilled in me that sort of hard work and make a difference sort of ethos or value, if you get me. So I could really see the tangible impact of what they were doing, creating homes for people to live in and raised their families in right from an early age. So
Yep.
I think that was a very sort of foundational thing for me, that sort of impact and making a difference, which I guess ties into why I've ultimately ended up at OCT. But we're jumping ahead a bit there. So I didn't immediately go into the family business of property development or house buildings, my dad would say. Instead, I sort of took a bit of a left at the traffic lights route, and I went and read philosophy and literature at Warwick many years ago now, more than I care to remember. But on graduating from Warwick, it turns out there weren't that many jobs for philosophers in the market. So I actually did go into the family business at that point, and was a project manager on construction sites for a good while. A couple of years I worked in the business, and because it was a family business and it was a reasonably small family business, there were about 15 people employed directly at any one time. We all sort of wore lots of hats. So that was one of my first experiences of really rolling my sleeves up and, getting into the nitty gritty. And as you might imagine, as a sort of graduate and as a woman coming out of university in, what was that, 2000, very early 2000s, I'll say no more, being on building sites and whatever was a reasonably interesting education. So yeah, I spent a bit of time doing that. Then, having spent that time and thought, yeah, okay, this is interesting, taking a project from, basically a brownfield site or a greenfield site. I actually worked on quite a lot of conversions. We did a Victorian school that was a really fascinating project to work on. But having done that and taken it sort of from end to end, from the beginning of the build right through to actually handing keys over to people who were moving in, that feeling of impact and purpose was sort of really ingrained. I think it kind of come full circle from sitting around the table with my parents of an evening as a child and watching them do it, and then being able to participate in that was really cool. But I knew that I didn't want to go and sort of back to university and study architecture or something like that. I wanted to do something with the brain, or different with the brain, I should say. So I ended up moving myself to London and retraining as a lawyer, again, for my sins. And that was around, 2004-ish. I ended up in private practice in the city, working in commercial litigation, intellectual property, mostly was the focus there, and also just general commercial. And I think because I came to law a little bit later than some of my contemporaries who were training, only by a few years, like a couple of years, but with that extra life experience comes a bit of, I don't know, gravitas, or perhaps ability to talk to people in a way that some of the more junior folks weren't quite ready to do yet. I ended up being sort of
streetwise, I think.
Yeah, streetwise, maybe streetwise. My sister would probably disagree with you there, but that's another story. So I ended up kind of parachuted into different clients. I went on secondment to London Underground Limited, so subsidiary of TfL, and was working on big construction projects for them, new trains for the Piccadilly line back in the again mid-2000s, I would say. And then I also spent a long time at All Saints Retail Limited. I don't know if you're familiar with the All Saints brand. Lots of very beautiful clothes. So one of the best things about that job was that you did, because you had to, working at head office, you had to wear All Saints clothes, and they gave you a uniform allowance, which was quite fun at that time. I don't get one of those with OCT. Maybe I should take that up with somebody. Doesn't feel maybe the lab coat isn't quite as fun as some of that stuff. So basically, I spent a lot of time in commercial environments for clients when I was even in private practice as a solicitor, and really discovered that's where I enjoyed it the most, because you could see your decisions, your work making a difference, or having an impact on the direction of the business, and solving problems for people on the fly, and so that was really what pulled me out of private practice. Eventually, after about 7 years, I was in private practice. I moved out and started consulting again. I think blame my father for this. I'm a bit sort of entrepreneurial and self-starting, and I'm not necessarily always thrilled to be in a big structure or a big organization. So I like to be able to, get things done and move fast. So big structures don't necessarily always bring out the best in me, I would say. So yeah, I moved out. I did some consulting. I was I went in to pitch for work at Hutchison 3G as a consultant, and they were, that's the trading name, of Three, the mobile phone company, who now do broadband and all sorts of other cool stuff. But at the time, they were just doing mobile. And I went in to pitch my consulting work. So it's probably one of my failures was I didn't manage to get them to hire me as a consultant on the sort of terms that I really wanted. I ended up going in to work with them full time because I hadn't done the sort of telecoms part. I'd done a lot of IP, I'd done a lot of commercial litigation, a lot of just general commercial, and the telco and the regulatory side. I thought, you know what, maybe I should go and learn this and add this into the mix. So I ended up going and working with them for just over a year, and then was headhunted by Virgin Media. And I'd always wanted to work for Virgin. Actually, I think a lot of people that I talk to about this have the same sort of romance about that brand. They've really got a good. They make a very good impression from a brand perspective. Whatever you might think of Richard Branson, he was no longer involved by the time I turned up, but they'd really done well on the branding. So I was wooed a bit by them, and I went from sunny Maidenhead, where Three were based at the time, stopped doing my reverse commute out of London and back in, and went to Hammersmith, where Virgin were based. They'd been acquired by Liberty Global at that point. About a year before I joined, I think. And so I spent 2 years there, again, in the legal team, but working across the reg sector and with their advertising and their marketing folks. All really problem solving. I think that's the thing about when you're in-house as a lawyer, you're mainly seen as a problem solver. And, it's actually one of the most fun things about the job. People come to you and say, hey, how are we going to get this done?
Yeah.
And I know the legal teams in-house and lawyers generally do come in for a bit of flack sometimes as the sort of department that says no. But my ethos has always been, right, okay, how are we going to get where we need to get to? What's the most efficient way of doing that? And let's find a way to do it, which surprises people sometimes because they're expecting a bit more resistance. So anyway, so spent some time at Virgin Media. And then again, I think coming back to perhaps the flaw in my personality, it was a big system. I was a small piece of a much bigger organization, and I don't really thrive in those environments. And it just got to the point where I thought, you know what, I think I need a challenge, I need something new. Let me go out on my own again. So I left Virgin Media and I started consulting again. So again, sort of commercial legal consulting for various different businesses and brands. I did something in the wellness space with a lifestyle and an athlete chap who was a very impressive guy, actually, ex-triathlete who'd had a sort of massive injury just before he was supposed to be participating. I think it was the Sydney Games in 2000, and had to rebuild his body basically, and then moved into training other people. So I had a really interesting time doing some work for him. And then also started a sort of new string to the bow, which was a natural progression, I guess, because as a lawyer, you spend a lot of time solving problems for people and coaching them through things. So I started working as a sort of management coach and was working for the managers at and giving training to managers at Google. And I did that for almost 2 years, maybe a bit longer, actually, 2.5 years, via a US law firm called Seyfarth Shaw. So I did a lot of traveling during that time and was responsible mainly for trainings in the Asia Pacific region. So I spent a lot of time pinging between sort of Singapore and Tokyo and Sydney and then various bits of Europe as well, which was very cool, lots of fun. That's where I had my first taste of pharma as well, because through that training, that coaching work for Google, I ended up with another client called Biogen, who lots of people will be familiar with, the massive massive behemoth Biogen. So I was delivering training for them too. That was the sort of first time I got into the pharma space. And then ultimately was introduced to one of the co-founders of OCT via an old law school friend of mine who was actually at Imperial Brands at the time. She was leading their corporate development team and doing deals. And she led the team that ran their investment into OCT back in April 2018. And as part of that, recommended me to have a chat with them about the general counsel role. So that's how I ended up sort of at OCT's front door.
Okay.
Excellent. This is one of the main reasons why we do this podcast, Clarissa, because just when you sort of look, the sort of front door, and you get a sort of outline idea of what the person's like and what they're about. But when you actually get to speak to somebody like yourself, and we get 10, 15 minutes of your history, you find it's fascinating. Some of the sort of forks and branches and your journey along the way. I've had plenty of them as well, and I wouldn't change a single thing. I mean, some of them have been wrong and it's a disaster, but at the end of the day, I seem to be doing all right, and it's been fun along the way. So no, this is why we do it, just so we can get a personal experience from yourself. And there was one thing that kind of hit home from me that you were talking about. You grew up and your dad was always working and the family was always working, and it was just kind of expected. Probably in the last 3 or 4 years since I left the sort of 9-to-5 role and started out in my own businesses, it's pretty much been the same as me now. I'm doing sort of 24/7. I don't seem to stop, even when you go on holiday. The laptop follows you and the phone follows you, and I think the kids now just accept that if I'm on the phone, I'm always going to be working 2 or 3 hours a day, regardless where I'm in holiday. And it can be frustrating for the family at times. My wife gets fed up with it sometimes because I always promise that I won't do anything, and then you get dragged into something. But at the end of the day, if you don't do it that day, it's waiting for you the next day, and it just snowballs. So
it's true. It's true, Kenny. What I would say is that when I was growing up, and I've clearly hinted at this already because I'm not 21. We didn't have. My dad didn't have, a laptop and a mobile, or my mum wasn't They weren't bringing their work on holiday. So work was always there. So my parents worked together and worked from home. So my mum ran the sort of operations and the admin side of the business, as well as some of the interior stuff too. And my dad did the design and the planning, and ultimately we hired people to build things out for us. But they worked really closely together. So I guess I grew up with that environment of business was a conversation, and it was always part of the sort of family, just discussion and around the dinner table, and just being in that environment and seeing that. But it is really influential, actually, I think. And it makes you quite well suited, or certainly made me quite well suited to the sort of roll your sleeves up and get on with it nature of having a small team. So we've got a really small team at OCT, right? We keep that really tight because we want to spend the money on the research, which is ultimately going to make a difference to those people who we're trying to help, the folks who are really in need of some solutions for the chronic pain issues that are out there that aren't currently solved or are solved badly by opioids. But keeping that team small means that the people who are in the team do need to be able to knuckle down, right?
Yeah, there's no hiding in a small team. I've worked in big establishments before, big major computer manufacturers, and you see people that make a whole career of hiding. They're just walking around with a clipboard, and everybody knows what they're up to. But
I know. I have a sort of a grudging respect actually for them, because it must be, it takes some nerve to manage that and to make a career of it, as you say. And we will all know people like that. I'm thinking of a few right now. Won't name any names, obviously, but Yeah,
it's frustrating, and they always seem to survive and come out smelling of roses, and they're smart. They do the right things and they talk to the right people, and they send the right emails. There's people that definitely email their way to the top, but that's a story for another podcast. But there's definitely no hiding in a small team. You've just got to knuckle down and get on with it. Just with your role within OCTP, just probably for my benefit as well, and probably a few of the listeners, what's a general counsel? What does that mean within the company? What do you?
It's a good question because it's very, the lawyers that are listening will know exactly, but it does sound a bit cryptic, doesn't it? What am I in charge of troops? What's going on? Like it's a bit of a funny title. So general counsel is basically the most senior lawyer that you have in an organization. I wear two hats. So I'm general counsel, which means I'm responsible for all the legal obligations, all the regulatory obligations. I'm the company secretary too. So I have that extra fun job, but the sort of legal stuff is, clearly, deal structures, M&A, general contracts, service. We've got a load of CROs, really amazing CROs that we work with, so contract research organizations that we work with to deliver our drug development, because, as I said, we're a small team and we have this kind of hub and spoke model where we're the hub and sending out instructions out there to the contract research organizations who are delivering the drug development that we're instructing. So those all require documentation and contracts in place. So that's part of it. And then from a COO kind of aspect, I mean, every COO I talk to has a slightly different job. I don't think it's a title that's a very useful one if you're looking to say, oh, yes, you'll definitely do X, Y, and Z if you are a COO. My role is mostly I would describe it as sort of keeping all the plates spinning in the business, if that makes sense. So we've got Valentino Paravicini, who's our Chief Scientific Officer, who is 100% responsible for the scientific, strategy and direction and delivering that. But in the background, I'm there making sure the lights are still on and keeping all those operational things that perhaps you don't think about until they stop working.
Yeah, makes sense. And I suppose if having an in-house lawyer as well will save dramatically in costs, because these people are not cheap if you go external to source that service. So I can see why it's why you've got the two hats on. But sorry, Mark, I've been kind of talking too much. Are you wanting to cover anything that Clarissa talked about in our career progression?
Well, no, I think it's very interesting. I think what you said about sort of families being very influential, that's extremely relevant. Your parents shape you, don't you, as to what you become as an adult. And my father's an entrepreneur. He's ran two businesses now, but it was the one when I was growing up. And I do recall going on a holiday, but he always seemed to focus on the holidays. I think he must have at that point got the business to where it needed to be, that it could run almost with him taking some time off, which is what we're still working on here actually at Stockfox. I do occasionally need a holiday, but to sort of grow up and experience him always being busy, always going away for long periods of time to work, it does kind of set your mindset up to you as an adult as well, and I think that's sort of rubbed off on me a little bit for sure. So
I mean, it's the same. Obviously, it's rubbed off on me. Like my sister's the same. So she, in a very different sphere, she went away and set up her own business. So she ran, has actually only just recently sold a really successful B&B and cafe restaurant in the Cotswolds here, where we live. And so she's been her own. She's actually about 10 years younger than me. So she's way ahead of the game as far as I'm concerned. I'm constantly playing catch up, honestly, looking over my shoulder. But so that was super influential for her too, but in a different aspect. But we both ended up either wanting to work pretty autonomously or in organizations where you have a lot of control over setting the direction and influencing where things are going.
Yeah, I do have a cafe for my sons as well, Clarissa, as one of them.
Very good.
Yeah, well, that was a whole new learning experience. So it was.
Oh my goodness. It's such hard work, Kenny. Oh my God. It's such hard work.
It is hard work. But if you ever want a coffee when you're up in Scotland, then just be sure to let Kenny know and he'll sort you out, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll know where to go. It's very helpful.
You can even pay in crypto, I think, can't you, Kenny?
Yeah, we're trying to get that in interface working. Yeah, so yeah, I like to adopt different technologies and things like that. So yeah, we're trying to accept crypto and attract the younger crowd. Like to do everything with their phone or their Apple Watch, or some people even pay with their ring now, which is weird. I don't know how
We're
you do
living
it.
in the future, guys. It's really terrifies me
Yeah, yeah,
every day.
definitely. So, well, that's a good link then. So, talking about the future and what is OCTP are trying to do, I think it'd be good for investors just to maybe get almost like a helicopter view of what
Sure.
OCT are doing. I think they've only been listed about a year in the stock market, but obviously there's a wee bit of history before that as well. So maybe if you could just give us a history of OCT, where it was born and what that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, of course. So our founder, Neil Mahapatra, who is still on our board as a NED, was a science graduate at Oxford, and he actually started OCT back in 2017 in response to his mum passing away from cancer, and having during that time when she was ill looked into cannabis and cannabinoids as medicine, and he really looked at that and thought, hang on a minute, there's nobody doing the proper regulatory approved route, and there's a huge gap here. We need somebody needs to be looking into cannabinoids and the potential medical benefits of them in a rigorous and a sort of a regulatory approved way. So he set up OCT. At that time, he did it in conjunction with the University of Oxford, which was a massive coup, really. This is way before I joined, so I can't take any credit for any of this, sadly. But yeah, we had a partnership agreement with Oxford University where we had exclusive access to use is the wrong word, to work with any of their professors, and we had sort of 3 different projects, early research projects running with their professors. By the time I joined, that was well underway, and we'd got also built a library of cannabinoid derivatives. I joined in sort of December 2018. So we were looking at the pain market specifically, because that's ultimately a very obvious place to start, and there's a huge unmet need, right?
Yep.
As you said, you're quite right. We listed in May 2021 on the main market of London Stock Exchange, which was a lot of work, I have to say, but a massive achievement for the company and for me personally, because it was certainly the first time I'd run that sort of transaction. And as you both will know, there are lots of moving parts, and particularly for a cannabinoid business where you've got the good old Proceeds of Crime Act issues that you've got to make sure everybody's comfortable with, and of course we are all comfortable with that. We're fully licensed by the Home Office and so on. So yeah, we listed last year in May, and ultimately we're a pharmaceutical company, so we don't do medical cannabis. We're a pharma company, and the aim is to develop the sort of next generation of cannabinoid medicines, ultimately targeting the chronic pain market, which is estimated to be worth about $90 billion by the time we'll be launching our first medicine in about 2027. So it's a massive market. We've got millions and millions of people living with chronic pain every day that's either unresolved, there's no treatment for it at all, or at the moment, or is resistant to treatments that are being used, which leaves lots of those folks dependent on opioids, right? And obviously we all know the consequences of those. There are about 50 million people in the US using opioids, and there are about 60,000 opioid-related deaths in the US in 2020. So we know we need new, effective, non-addictive treatments. And actually the FDA has come out, a couple of years ago, came out and said they see cannabinoids as, a route forward here, and wants pharmaceutical companies to go down the traditional route of drug development to actually create these medicines that they can then approve, and patients can benefit from ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Good that the FDA recognised that eventually. Took them long enough.
Yeah, sure did.
But, yeah, no, it's a fascinating area. One of my friends many years ago, probably back in 2007, a similar kind of story. Really, he was in a well, I think he was actually maybe recreationally using
Mm,
cannabis in somewhere, and someone came in and their husband was dying of cancer, and they'd done some research and wanted to basically buy cannabis, and this sort of sparked his train of thought going, and got very interested in the subject, did an awful lot of research, and ended up making a whole documentary about people who were stage 4 cancer, nowhere left to go, really, told they didn't, nothing more that could be done by the medical profession,
mm,
and were turning to sort of self-help and treat themselves with
mm.
creating oil for
Yeah.
treating the cancer. And the documentary was fantastic. It was fascinating. I mean, even if the people didn't manage to survive, it certainly transformed their quality of life and extended what they were being told they would get. And now that friend is out in Alicante, and he's actually growing it himself, and he's got his own
Yeah.
little medical cannabis company going on. For
Very cool.
Yeah, pretty cool. So I mean, it's a very it's a fascinating space, but it's still, of course, surrounded by sort of stigma, isn't it, and prohibition in some cases. But we are getting there,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think things are changing. People are beginning to realize that, frankly, it's a bit of a quirk of history that cannabis has this stigma attached to it and alcohol doesn't, right?
Mm,
It's quite an interesting left at the traffic lights we took at that point in time,
indeed.
given the sort of the harmful outcomes of either of those things, right?
Indeed.
Um, Interesting you mentioned sort of the cancer route. So you'll probably know, but our primary program, OCT 461201, has had some really good results in treating or I'd say showing efficacy in CIPN, which is chemotherapy induced peripheral neuropathy, which about 60% of people who undergo chemotherapy treatment get CIPN after about 3 months of being taking their chemo. And it can be it's really unpleasant. It's I don't know if you're familiar, but it's basically numbness, tingling, sensitivity to heat and pain in your extremities, so hands and feet. So it's really actually inhibiting in terms of getting on with your life, and it can just hang around even after you've stopped chemo. But it's so unpleasant that lots of people stop their chemo, which obviously isn't what anybody wants. If you're going through chemotherapy, there's a very good reason for it, so stopping it isn't a good plan. So we're really excited about that program, being able to use cannabinoids in combination with chemo to help folks who are suffering with cancer.
And how are you finding, as general counsel for OCTP, how are you finding the whole litigate or regulation environment for the company? I mean, are you finding there's lots of hurdles you've got to do, or barriers that are put in your way, or are you finding that you do the right thing and people are quite receptive?
That's exactly that, Mark. So because we're following the sort of normal drug development route of proper, robust clinical trials, approval through by regulatory authorities, we're not doing anything different to a GSK or a Pfizer, right, in terms of drug development. So provided we're following those routes and we've got our home office license so that we can possess and supply Schedule 1 drugs, which cannabinoids fall into, we've got all those steps in place, and then we're just following the standard route. So we actually don't, OCT doesn't need any change in regulation or change in legal position in order just to carry out the business model that we've got. We're going down that pharma route for the main reason of, we want regulatory approval so that we can make claims about our medicines and say, yes, this treats CIPN, for instance. And then doctors will be able to prescribe medicines, insurance companies can reimburse them, patients have got confidence that what they're taking is going to actually help. And of course, from an investment point of view, from a shareholder point of view, market exclusivity, that all-important market exclusivity that gives you ultimately the ability to generate revenue.
Yes, and of course that's again your role, isn't it? IP and making sure all that is secured for the company. Are you purely lab based, or are you actually sort of growing the cannabis yourself, or are you buying it as a purchaser?
It's all lab based, so actually
Lab
it's
based.
all it's we're not touching a plant at all at the moment. No, that's right.
Okay.
It was good that you touched on this sort of pipeline of projects there, or programs, as you guys like to call them. It's nice and simple. I like it. Program 1, 2, 3, and 4. Maybe just for the benefit of our listeners. I mean, I know you touched in program 1, which was 1201, and obviously they're at different stages. I mean, 1 and 2 look almost like at the sort of preclinical stage, and 3 and 4 are obviously less advanced. Could you maybe just do like a minute in each of them, just a snapshot of what they're targeting, where they are in the journey, and etc.
Yeah, sure. So we've talked a little bit about program 1s, but I'll just give you a quick overview. So it's program 1 is a highly selective CB2 agonist, which we in-licensed from a spin-out company who spun out of Pfizer in Japan. We in-licensed that back in 2019, and it's showing really good promise in CIPN, as I mentioned. It's also got some good data in IBS as well. So that is at the preclinical stage, and it will be ready to go into the clinic at the very beginning of next year, which we announced a little while ago. We're very excited about that, like moving from preclinical into the clinic, actually going into healthy volunteers and demonstrating, hopefully, I'm pretty confident, but you've got to always say hopefully, demonstrating that it's safe and tolerated in healthy volunteers is that first phase 1 step. So really excited to get into the clinic with that. Then program 2 it's an inhaler. Actually, what I should have said about program 1 is that will be a tablet that you take probably twice a day, to be confirmed how many times, probably twice a day. And then program 2 is an inhaler that's targeting trigeminal neuralgia, which is a very fast onset, very painful condition, facial pain, as you'd expect from the trigeminal nerve down the side of your face. I don't know why I'm touching my face here because you can't see me, but rest assured, I'm touching my face, going down the side of the face. Really unpleasant condition, very sharp, excruciating pain, very fast onset and unexpected. So it's quite poorly treated by current medicines. You need something that is going to act fast, which is why we've gone down the inhaled route. And as I said, that is looks like a asthma inhaler, essentially. And again, that is at the preclinical stage and is almost ready to go into the clinic as well. And then programs 3 and 4 are at the more discovery stage. They are coming out of the library of derivatives that we in-licensed from Canopy Growth Corporation, which we announced September last year. That's been a really great investment, actually, because it's showing a lot of promise in terms of what's actually in the bucket of compounds that we in-licensed. There were over 335, I think, from memory, but don't quote me on that. Definitely over 300. And we've got 2 of those that we're looking at specifically for programs 3 and 4, which are in that sort of discovery stage. But by the end of this round, we'll be coming towards the sort of lead candidate and getting ready for preclinical. Again, they'll be looking at pain, neuropathic pain. That's the main plan, but they are sort of looking more widely in terms of other indications, oncology, inflammation, and so on. So there's a broad spectrum and a pretty robust pipeline that we've got there.
And obviously, having four different programs on the go, it always generates news because they're at different stages, etc. So, and what you maybe learn for program 1, any issues that you came across, you can streamline for program 2, 3, and 4. So there's probably learning.
Yeah, that's right. And there's also a benefit. So, as I said, program 1 is a new chemical entity, so that's synthesized, and that will get patent protection, right? So, but program 2 is a phytocannabinoid combination. It's a combination of THC and CBD, and in terms of protection, from intellectual property standpoint, what you're looking at there actually is regulatory protection, because trigeminal neuralgia is what we call an orphan indication. So there are fewer cases of it around, which means that the regulator gives companies exclusivity in order to promote or to encourage, rather than to, us to make medicines for those conditions. So looking at sort of patent protection for program 1 and regulatory exclusivity for program 2. But because what you said about the pipeline and lots of things coming through, the other great thing about what we're doing with the compounds we've selected is that they do have potential across lots of different indications. So you only have to do your phase 1 once. So for instance, with program 1, once we're through phase 1, and we, then go into phase 2 for that indication we get through. If you want to then expand out and take that compound and apply it to something else, you've done your phase 1, so that money doesn't have to be spent again. You're already you've got a phase 2 ready compound for a different indication, which is really sort of value accretive, very helpful.
Yeah, so there's synergies between the programs. I think that's essentially what you're saying, and obviously that leads to cost savings, time savings, etc., etc.
Correct. Yeah.
So what about peers then in the UK and indeed worldwide? I mean, are there any majors doing a similar thing to yourself, or is it quite a niche market?
I mean, the obvious comparison is GW Pharmaceuticals, obviously acquired by Jazz. We'll all be aware of that lovely large number they were acquired for last year. So they're the obvious comparator, but we're clearly some way behind them. But that's those whose footsteps we're following in. Hopefully, that's the plan.
Oh, good. Yeah, I know GW very well.
Yeah. I mean, and their program is, Epidiolex is essentially, again, a CBD THC combination. So you think about the market value they've generated with essentially an orphan indication phytocannabinoid based medicine, and without that sort of 20-year patent exclusivity, it becomes quite obvious that when you've got other programs in the pipeline, and in addition to something that's similar structure to that, it's a very exciting prospect.
Yeah. Do you think the industry will see a transformational shift, or do you think it will be sort of case by case as things go through the trials and then they are adopted as an effective treatment, rather than a kind of big BBC News headline, cannabis to treat cancer? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. I think it's probably going to be a bit of a slow burn.
Okay.
And then perhaps what we'll get to is a bit of a tipping point, right? As different medicines get the approvals that, they should be coming through over the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we'll get to the point where there are quite a few coming through for lots of different indications, not necessarily competing with one another, but across a spectrum, a very broad spectrum of indications or conditions that people need medicines for. We'll probably get to a tipping point where you will finally get that that BBC headline, perhaps a little later than we might want, but I think it will arrive eventually.
It's a terrible comparison, but it's a bit like smoking and vaping. When vaping first came out, this is never going to catch on. And all of a sudden now, everybody's vaping. It just seems to be accepting. But I don't smoke, so it's
people who didn't smoke as well.
Yeah, with vaping. Yeah.
And most of them are under 16, shall I say, as well. Unfortunately,
that's right.
Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. But Mark, I think it might be quite good actually to do the 60-second challenge with Clarissa. Well, I know I've not pre-warned her, but I think sometimes it's better if you just drop it in.
Yeah, we can just drop it in, but you're going to have a bit of a few seconds to think about it, because I do have one sort of last question before I throw that on to you. It was just really, what is it you like about your role at the minute, coming from, you talked about there, from the family business in construction to the lawyer role in various big organizations. What is it you like about what you're doing now, the role you're doing, and what the team you're with, and the projects you're working on?
Ultimately, it actually comes back down to what felt good in that family business, right? Actually making a difference. And one of the most powerful feelings I had when I was working with my parents and with the family is that moment where you were handing the keys to somebody, to their new home, and they were really excited about it. That sort of tangible feeling of impact. That the potential here at OCT is to have a tangible impact on many thousands of people's lives in terms of improving their quality of life with a medicine that doesn't currently exist. That's the thing that gets me out of bed every morning. Ultimately, that's really the impact, and it feels, particularly from a legal background. I know lots of lawyers, and I'm friends with many of them still, who struggle with the purpose of what they're doing. Like they're really good at their jobs, but what am I actually helping to achieve? So being able to apply those skills that I learned, and also this, from the commercial side too, to really something I feel is ultimately a pretty altruistic and impactful goal is really special and a great privilege, actually, and not something I take for granted. That's for sure.
Okay, good. Well, I hope you get there, and you've got the right mindset to get there, and they're on the right track to do it. So hopefully that does come to fruition, and
thank you.
You can be rewarded, and shareholders as well, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Well, on that note, then, the 60-second challenge. 60 seconds in order to make a bit of a pitch for the company from an investment point of view. Why people should consider investing in Oxford Cannabinoid Technologies. So, are you up for the challenge, Clarissa?
Yes, I am. I'm very up for it.
Good. Right, I'll count you in then, and then I'll start a little stopwatch. So, in 3, 2, 1, off you go.
Okay, well, here at OCT, as I've said, we're a pharmaceutical company who are creating next generation cannabinoid medicines. We're going through robust clinical trials to get approval by regulatory authorities. That means we can make claims about our medicines. So we can say our medicine treats, for example, CIPN. Doctors will be able to prescribe those medicines. Insurance companies will be able to reimburse them. And we'll have market exclusivity, either under patent protection or under regulatory exclusivity for orphan indications. Ultimately, it's an opportunity to be part of something that we hope is going to make a real difference to many thousands of people who are suffering from chronic pain. There are millions of people around the world suffering from chronic pain. We know the market is going to be worth approximately $90 billion by the time we launch our first medicine. It's some sort of 5-6 years away now. And that's a big market to have even a small piece of. So we're very confident that we'll be able to generate financial success for shareholders ultimately, and also that sort of feeling that you've genuinely made a difference and helped people along the way.
Okay, excellent. Well done. That's minute 18, but we'll give you that. That's fine.
That's fine. Very kind of you. I told you I could talk, you see, that's the trouble. We didn't even get into Belfast. Goodness me.
We can save that for another time. We'll
save that for another time, exactly.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, I mean, that was very good. Thank you very much for your time. It's good to get all that insight into where you've come from and what we're hoping to achieve at the company. So thank you very much. Kenny, any final thoughts?
No, that was great. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and like I say, 55 minutes is just flown by. That's the beauty of these podcasts. You don't think you're talking for a long time, and then you look at the clock and you go, well, there's an hour went. And this is why they work. We don't really have a format as such. We just talk, and it seems to flow. So this is why we enjoy doing them, because we think if you structure them, then it doesn't work. But this is the best way. We get all the interesting stuff from the CEOs and our general counsel, or COO, as you are.
many hats, Penny, many hats. Whatever you want, whichever one you want, that's fine.
Excellent. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon, Clarissa.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks very much, guys. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for your time too.
Thank you, Clarissa.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another podcast from Market Musings with Ben and Russell. Tune in next time.